going live. It's for two of you. I think it's easier to have. Okay. So yesterday I was on the hot seat, and today our two Ajahns are on the hot seat. Okay. So I'm going to leave it to both of you to introduce yourself. I didn't take notes and have a bio ready or anything like that. But I do want to say it's a really wonderful opportunity for our community to learn from Buddhists in other traditions, especially from monastics. And there's a lot of exchange and learning that can go on. And I think the Buddha would be very happy seeing his disciples from many different traditions get together and talk and share. So this is also, I think, a modern day offering to the Buddha. Yeah. So with that, would you please introduce yourselves?
Hello. I'd like to introduce Arjun Kovilo. Let me see how good a job I do. Arjun Kovilo was born in Ohio. No, he wasn't. He grew up in Ohio. He ordained in 2010 at Abhayagiri, and he spent 5 years or 6 in California before, as a monk before going to Thailand. Yeah, and then spent several years in Thailand. He lived near Ajahn Jayasaro, edited Stillness Flowing. He's a wonderful monk now, 13 bosses in robes, and currently studying at Dharma Realm Buddhist University, although the hope is that next year he'll be up in Seattle at Clear Mountain regularly or permanently. And we first became friends when we camped in a grove of poison ivy together, more or less. Tudong.
This is Ajahn Nisabo. I don't know where you were born, but probably, yeah,
ask his
probably
mom.
San Francisco. Okay, grew up in Pacific Northwest, at least partially in Spokane, and as people have heard, got his this was a big Dharma entry gate for him here at Sravasti and Venerable Thupten Chodron, and then maybe around 2009 or 10, came through Abhayagiri. We met briefly on your way to Thailand, where you went and ordained with Ajahn Anan, who Venerable Thupten Chodron stayed with. And you lived in Thailand mostly, or not entirely, for the next 6 years or so, and then came back to America. You and I have been involved with creating, or you've been actually on the ground in Seattle creating the Clear Mountain community, which has a website, really beautiful website, and a nice YouTube presence. And Ajahn Nisabo goes alms 5 days a week into Pike's Place Market, and that's all of his food for the day. It's just whatever he gets in the mornings, and teaches at St. Mark's Cathedral on Saturdays. And yeah, that's it. Okay.
Okay. So first I'd like to ask you if you could talk about your training as Theravada monks, and then for you to personally, what your experience was being trained in that way. What was helpful to you? Where did your mind push back? Where did doubt come up? And how did you deal with all of that? The process going from a lay person to being a monk.
I mean, kind of my first monastic jump into the monastic pool was a bit of a failure, actually. Jumping into Wat Metta, the monastery in Southern California. Basically, I had spent the year prior just living and reading everything that the abbot there wrote, listening to his talks, multiple talks every day, gave away everything I had with the idea that I would go and ordain there. And it just was not a good match. It just turned out to be not a good match, and somewhat of a painful experience. Just, yeah, wasn't like the teacher and myself just, yeah, I was very new to the monastic life, very idealistic, coming from the Goenka tradition of meditation, thinking basically monastic life is just a meditation retreat. And that's not the best attitude to come into a monastery with. And one of the things there, like one of the abbot's ways of teaching was teaching by example, but not really teaching so explicitly. So getting kind of feedback when I would do something wrong, but not really getting positive reinforcement when I would do something right. And I just wasn't ready for that kind of training. And I wasn't really being observant. Like I wanted everything to be written down for me. And the abbot there is great. He's a great writer and has written a whole, 2-volume Buddhist monastic code. But there's so much about living in a monastery, which you just have to pick up by actually being open in the moment to the people around you. And I just wasn't picking that up. So that's just kind of my first year and a half of failing at the kind of the training. But then going to Abhayagiri and having there, it was very kind of abbot centric in terms of the abbot being the main teacher, whereas Abhayagiri, it's much more integrated, was able to fit right into the community. It was very clear like what my duties were, and by then had kind of opened myself up more to like just observing what needed to be done and just wanting to be a good community member. And when was finally given, thank you. When I was finally given ordination, just extremely grateful. That was like the most humbling thing actually to be given ordination. So just a little bit of a picture.
The training, I mean, I think there's a lot of similarities between here, what I've seen here in the Thai Theravada. I ordained in Ajahn Chah lineage in Wat Mapjan in Thailand, which is an interesting hybrid because it's a Thai abbot with a decent, maybe 40 Thai monks and maybe 15 Westerners. So you get a bit of both. And I think one of the real issues with one of the reasons I wanted to go to Thailand was because I thought that the sort of taste of the teachings, which is a bit can be kind of fire and brimstone, and the asceticism was a natural balance to the Thai culture. I mean, many of those the people in Thailand, grew up in the countryside in these tight-knit villages. You have one kid raised by 6 or 7 households. So there's this underlying kind of substrate of metta, of loving kindness, which I think is probably similar in Tibetan culture as well. And then you kind of plop a Westerner in that, and it's like mixing acid with acid in terms of the bringing a Westerner with our sort of self-flagellating Judeo-Christian consumerist tendencies into the teaching that is meant to balance out a certain or be held by a certain loving kindness in the culture. And because we don't have as much of that here, I think it can really go kind of a bit pear-shaped when that's not adjusted for. And so the first few years of my monastic life, we're just trying to translate that disconnect and, understand that there was this room for doing things other than just going back to your kuti and meditating and getting down to business. And I think that's huge. I think the Western Thai forest tradition has been much of a bit of a monoculture for some time, and we're just figuring out how to accommodate a greater breadth of personality types. And I think the biggest thing for me was Freud spoke about 2 drives in the human heart. One is thanatos, which is the death instinct, which when you're socialized manifests as the superego. So it's the part that renounces and says, eat little, speak little, sleep little, all that. And then you have eros, which is much more akin to like chanda. So like the love instinct of giving and making things grow and contributing. And my experience is that people come into the monastic life with so much heart and into practice. And because in certain monastic situations, and I think this has been a real issue in the Theravada, there just aren't that many routes for Eros. It's mostly like, practice harder, go back to your renounce more. It's all Thanatos. And I think one of our biggest projects currently is finding roots for the Eros in the heart, because and the metrics we should be applying to some extent are flourishing, warmth, and normalcy. So for me, a big project was just finding roots for the Eros in me, and writing poetry or contributing to this or that, or contributing to the community. And those are things that are being held more, cultivated more and more. But I think that's the linchpin of what I've seen keep people in robes, is if there's a way for their heart to, it's not rocket science, but to be nourished. And the archetype of the monastic is so powerful that people can get really weird trying to get to it. So
Yeah.
Yeah. So now you can ask them questions. Yeah.
So the first question is for Arjun Kovilo. What made you decide to study at Dhammaram Buddhist University? And the second question is for both Arjuns. How learning from different Buddhist traditions have benefited your practice and monastic training? Thank you.
Yeah, it's definitely a huge surprise. I left university when I was in my early 20s, thinking I was, too cool for school, and drop out and end up going to the monastery. And I'm really grateful for that. And was thinking, okay, I'm just done with university. Hadn't, up until, honestly, maybe like the 3 months before I actually applied to go to the university, I had no thought in my mind really about actually attending university. But once, when we were on pilgrimage, walking pilgrimage, so walking up kind of the roads that parallel the 101 in California, we've done this a number of times, passing by the city of 10,000 Buddhas. And this is, maybe on day 8 or 10 of a walking pilgrimage, when we've been sleeping on the side of the roads and eating whatever, eating candy, whatever people offer us, that day, random stuff. And then just coming into this monastery where we're totally taken in at the city of 10,000 Buddhas, and then being invited by one of my monastic brother friends, a monk there, Jin Chuanshi, to attend some of the classes. And was just really impressed with the quality of the classes, monastic teachers and longtime lay practitioners who had studied with Master Hua. So that seed was planted at that time, but still thought, oh, this is neat, but I'll probably never do it. But then came to kind of loggerheads in my own practice when I had put myself in what I thought was the ideal monastic situation, which is basically a monastery where all you do is meditate all day. And that's what I thought a monastery was, as I said. But it turns out I'm not, although that's the ideal monastery, it turns out I'm not the ideal monk, So it just got increasingly painful trying to live that way, and just thought, okay, I want to be a monk for the rest of my life. Very not sustainable in this mode. What can I do? Thought about going on pilgrimage, visiting there, the monastery and the university, and thought, oh, maybe that's an option. Ended up applying, and they gave me a very, very generous scholarship, basically, full scholarship. And so I decided to go. I checked with my teachers, and I was going to be living close to Abhayagiri, just 15 minutes away, and spoke with the abbot there, my main teacher, and thought, if anything goes too weird, I can always just leave and go back to the monastery. So I was thinking that I would be there mostly for Sanskrit and Pali, which has been the case. I learned more Sanskrit with the teacher, very good teacher, Shankar, Lauren Bausch. I learned more there in about 5 months than I did in about 6 years of self-study at the monastery, just given the feedback that I was giving. So that was great. But then also, I wasn't going there explicitly to learn more about the other yanas, more about the Chinese sutras, but have found that is actually the primary learning that I've come away with. Like sitting these week-long retreats each semester reciting Guanyin's name, doing full prostrations for a full week, doing Chan meditation, have just offered perspectives on practice which exist in the Theravada, but which are more fleshed out and elaborated upon so beautifully and in a way which I didn't really even know that I was missing. So I'm really grateful that I've gone. But that said, I am ready to get out and be done with it, because it's university. Like, who wants to be in university?
The second question was about what we've learned from other religious Buddhist traditions.
How it's benefited, how learning from different Buddhist traditions and benefit your practice of monastic training.
I mean, we read a wealth of teachers, and listen to just talks from a bunch of different traditions as well. So I think balancing out, like creating a more holistic picture of what this path can be, has been really helpful, and just seeing just the flavors of like stepping into a community like this, which is so kind of, there's so much loving kindness and a sense of harmony. It just gives you some perspective when you go back to other places to see which notes are similar and which are different. And I think there's a lot of benefit to that. Immense skillful means in the other traditions, I think. Part of me thinks the original Pali suttas are a bit like a seed. Like the Buddha they're just this very somewhat constrained articulation. It's apophatic method, so he speaks about nibbana largely by what you let go of to get there, rather than articulating it in detail. That's in Christian terms, you can have the via negativa versus cataphatic method, which is like via positiva, which is speaking about God by what it is. And I think in terms of nibbana, like Theravada was very restrained about articulating that. And I think what that did is it gives you the seed that will last for millennia as well. But then what was so interesting is those original teachings from the Pali canon got planted, and they give rise to these flowers, these beautiful, colorful articulations of the transcendent, of the divine. And obviously any articulation falls short, but there's just something that's so heartening about seeing how other cultures have allowed that blossom to be articulated, because there's something very real there. And yeah, that aspect of beauty, like Emerson spoke about the transcendentals and the human heart of goodness, truth, and beauty. And Theravada has a lot of goodness and a lot of truth, but we could use some help with the beauty. And I think stepping into other traditions that have cultivated that side more has been really like nourishing in that way too. So, children, if you ever want to chime in on anything we're saying,
I will, but not yet. I don't have anything to add. Other questions? Yeah.
One thing that stands out to me in your previous visits, but also in this visit with the two of you, is how respectful you are towards each other. And I just wonder what in your training brings that about specifically?
Well, there is a word in Pali which doesn't really have an English equivalent. It's suvacho. It's a monastic virtue. It's a beautiful sutra in the Majjhima Nikaya all about it. But just how to be beautiful or easy to vacha, easy to speak to, being easy to talk to. And it's framed specifically in the context of how to receive feedback. And I think that's been really important and a really key aspect of our relationship. Is we live in close quarters, and we're doing a lot of communication back and forth, a lot of planning back and forth, and there's just so much data to find fault with on both sides. And so I think really cultivating the friendliness and forgiveness and wanting to keep up the mutual kindness and mutual care, and this quality of being easy to speak to. And we ask forgiveness of each other so much. And And really, we're different characters. I mean, he has a lot more energy than I do, and yeah, and so pulls me forward when I might be more inclined to stay back. And he says that I kind of keep him back when he might be going too far forward. But yeah, it's a good balance. I'm certainly very grateful. I mean, the project that's starting up in Seattle, it's very inspiring, and it's basically been Ajahn Nisabo on the ground trailblazing. And yeah, I can see our paths being woven together for maybe, for a long time. And yeah, I think we're both working towards it being a community that flourishes, yeah, for the rest of our lives, for sure. And yeah, may we always put in the seeds to keep being good friends to each other. And yeah, we do take like it does kind of feel like a marriage, a little bit like getting married. So we're very open to marriage advice from people who have been in this longer than us.
Yeah, Ajahn Kovilo is a great example. And the other words which I think you bring up quite often are Uchu, which means upright, and mudu, which means soft. And they both appear, they're both in the Karaniya Metta, right? Sutta. So they're words of loving kindness. And the fact that both those things can be held in tandem, I mean, that's the key. I think that's just one of the key ethics to figure out in the monastic life, is how do you be upright, but also soft. And there is something about the formalities in our tradition, the Anjali, the fact that before we give feedback, we have to ask permission and receive permission, that we have to do it with loving kindness at a time, in a timely way. So like usually not before the meal. And, and the fact that he's senior, and there's times when I really acknowledge that, and other times where we both kind of just, let it go. But I find the formalities are meaningful. And if you can hold them lightly, they, in Western culture, we get that an internal inclination affects external action. Like you like someone, so you make Anjali. What we've forgotten, I think, is that external action affects internal inclination. So you make Anjali, and so you start to like someone. And not that that's what my liking you is predicated on, Ajahn, but it does, it's been important to preserve the brotherly aspect, but also the sacred aspect too. Because yeah, we're kind of married now, so.
And it's fun. He gets me to do things like jump in cold water that I wouldn't otherwise do. So.
Someone online asks, is there any forgiveness practice that you can recommend for lay practitioners?
Yes. Is this in our confession thing we wrote up for the laity as well? Forgiveness. There's a practice, I do this with my parents every time we leave each other usually, and I think it's just good, is it's based on the formula which we in the Thai forest at least use, where every 2 weeks you come up to a fellow monastic and say your offenses, those places you trespassed or slipped, and they say, do you see? And you say, I see. Will you be restrained in the future? I will be restrained in the future. So it's very simple, but it can be done very beautifully, and even with the Buddha Rupa. So, bowing beforehand together to the Buddha Rupa, do a brief chant or homage to the Buddha. Then one person bow to the other person and kind of lay out your heart, like and then you can say the good things you're grateful for after this as well. But, and then, yeah, do you see? I see. Will you be restrained in the future? I'll be restrained in the future. And then after you've both done that back and forth, bow again to the Buddha Rupa, and then maybe just finish up with a final chant. But it's very simple. We've written up a lay version of it in the Pali, which adjusts it slightly, but I think the English is fine if it's just, that's the basis of it.
In terms of, yeah, that's like confessing, saying what we've done wrong. And then the forgiveness ceremony is one we do, which I would love to do with you tomorrow. Maybe on behalf of the community, is just asking for forgiveness. Anytime we leave a monastery, if we've been there for a particular amount of time, we'll come and maybe offer a tray of candles, incense, and flowers, and then say, by body, speech, or mind, for whatever actions I've done, intentional or unintentional, I ask forgiveness, and then usually we'll be forgiven formally. It's up to you. It's up to you. But yeah. And yeah, and then it's usually after the formality, just a chance to offer thanks. Thank you for our hosts.
The rite that you described, it's the same as in the Tibetan tradition, except you would say, do you see this as a fault? Yes, I see this as a fault. Will you restrain henceforth? Yes, yeah. So the wording is a little bit different.
I like that. I like that.
But really saying, yes, I see it as a fault. So owning it.
I appreciate that actually extension. And yeah. One other thing also on the getting along is there's this sutta called, not the Kosambi of Majjhima Nikaya, no, with
The one that's
Anuruddha.
Anuruddha.
Yeah, you know, and everyone knows this one, like we blend like milk and water. I just think, let me put aside what I want to do and let the other venerable do what the other venerable ones want to do instead. And what's so interesting is at the end of that sutta, there's the, it speaks about the choirs of angels all the way up, sort of all echoing each other in Anumodana. And there's only a few places that happens in the whole canon, and they seem to be these markers of like a special significance. So I always thought that was a good one.
Yeah, we often go through that in EML.
So both of you have lived at other monasteries. What was the impetus for you to set up your own place? And yeah.
The places I lived were really wonderful. But I think, you know, I can reference a lot of surface things. I have a really weird schedule for my meditation. I really like going to bed like really early and getting up really early as well. And that just doesn't fly at most monasteries. So there is beauty in having a room to kind of make our own schedules. And then I also did want to be at a place where I could go to bhikkhuni ordinations. That was significant to me. But I think sometimes like what the Dhamma asks of you is, I think most of us have that experience with a kind of something coming to inhabit you, and that's how the Dharma kind of draws you along. A sense that it's not you so much trying to create something as just following what something much deeper has in mind. And that was the case with this Seattle thing, is it really felt like it just was something that probably it would be very beneficial if it happened. There's a lot of practicing Buddhists in Seattle, and to have a refuge of Dhamma where they could be seems really meaningful. And what a good use of a life, as long as the kind of core of the samana aspirations kept as well in the process. So I think it was a mix of all those for me.
I was just following along, I think. But it does feel good. I mean, my main teacher, my preceptor, just came and visited us this past weekend and gave a beautiful talk, full supportive day of basically helping us to find a home ceremony. So that felt very good. Like it was also something I didn't like going to a university. I didn't plan to start a monastery. Just being like a junior monk in the Ajahn Chach system. Yeah, I mean, I didn't really actually think that much about past year 5 or maybe year 10. It's kind of just doing everything that needs to be done at the monastery during those first 5 years. And then you've got more freedom to go and live at different places during the next 5 or 10. But I think it's quite usual that people become a bit aimless, like in those, we can wander, we can go on pilgrimage, went on pilgrimage in Thailand. went to India, going on pilgrimage in America, and just what's the actual direction and what is most sustaining for my monastic life. And this feels quite sustaining. It's like this eros tendency of like finding a project that I actually want to give my heart to. Because honestly, for me, living, part of me has figured out how to game the system at certain monasteries. Basically, I can do enough that enough people don't find fault enough to kick me out of the monastery. So it's predicated on a lot of like, just getting by. And that's not why I ordained. I didn't ordain just to get by. But seeing that tendency was actually quite disturbing. And something like starting up a monastery is something actually quite, it's something different and something to give myself to, rather than just settling, sitting back and kind of eating my blessings. So, yeah.
Oh, so you mentioned wanting to be somewhere where bhikkhuni ordination could happen. Do you see views towards bhikkhuni ordination changing within the Thai forest tradition?
I think there's a lot of different views in the mix, and just to be clear, like Clear Mountain would just be a monk community at the moment, or that's the plan, monk community. But hopefully with places where bhikkhunis could visit, and that's based on the advice we've gotten from several. Although it's just beautiful to see this community, but I always want to be clear around that so that no one gets confused. But yeah, the hope to be able to attend bhikkhuni ordinations and be good friends to our sisters in robes. I told Ayananda Bodhi, that we wanted to be supportive of our bhikkhuni sisters, and she said, "We don't need your support. We need you to be our good friends, and then with the ordinations, support would be helpful." So, so we've been trying to really hold that ethic of like be good friends to our sisters, and we had several bhikkhunis come up for the ceremony last week, and we have advisors, Ayya Santusikanachittananda, and visiting here is a real help. The views that are currently I see in the Thai forest tradition there are shifts, and yet there's also a lot going on in terms of the Thai elders. I think it's really helpful to put in historical context, because just a few years ago, the West was napalming every country around them. Thailand is one of 2 countries that avoid colonization, Japan and Thailand. And then suddenly all these white people come and tell them what they have to do with their religion. And honestly, their core, like their Buddhism was one of the few things that actually let them resist colonization and keep their identity. And they actually really crystallized its structure to resist missionary encroachment from the Christians. It's a weird karma at work here. But the point is that institution is not ready to change yet. And this first generation of monastics that have come over, I think they are really, there is a balancing they're trying to do. And I'm not defending it or anything like that, but I'm saying that we are in a different place currently as the next generation, I think. Yeah, and that's sort of what I see at the moment. Is I think there are shifts, but I think there's a place for, I think Clear Mountain represents kind of something we're able to move a little bit more in that way, in a healthy way. And we're hoping to do it in a way that's not confrontational at all. I mean, we have such deep love for our teachers, and they've given us so much. And we do have a little more wiggle room, and we're using that. Hope I spoke skillfully there.
Yeah, that's one thing that I see when I visit Thai Theravada places, is, especially for the Westerners, is you're very beholden to the Thais and the other people in Southeast Asia. And so in organizing your community, you do it, or the places I've been, they do it according to the Thai model. Yeah, because if they didn't do it, they would lose their support. And most of the support comes from the Asians, not from the rest of the Americans. Yeah. And so stepping out to do something new is difficult because you're beholden in that direction. That's what I've observed.
It's certainly a dynamic. I honestly get the sense many of our teachers, because they've all seen how the monasteries that have gone into Bhikkhuni ordination have done, and it's been great. Ajahn Brahms is doing wonderfully. And I think right now it's less because of that financial support, because there's a lot of support to be had here. Clear Mountain is a case in point in terms of people being willing to step up. I think there is a genuine concern of these teachers who have given them so much. I mean, if you were required to make a pretty sharp break with the Dalai Lama or Venerable Yeshe or Zopa, I mean, it would be it's not simple. And I have sympathy for them in that area.
And does it have to be a sharp break?
Yes.
That's the question.
Agreed.
Is there a way to, he's good at massaging the system. Yeah, get him involved. And
I mean, your hand gesture there, I mean, that's one of the beautiful things about another beautiful thing about Thai culture is this Thai language and Thai culture. Like there's this concept of alum aloikan, which is basically being able to go around an issue. So like the formal Thai ecclesiastical Sangha, the Mahathera Samakom, has an official position. Bhikkhunis don't exist for whatever historical reasons they cite. But there are Bhikkhuni monasteries in Thailand that get support from bhikkhus in their area who give support. And again, it should be a lot more, and hopefully it will be in the future.
But not from the establishment.
Exactly.
From personal bhikshus, personal connections.
Yeah.
They aren't accepted by the establishment.
Yeah, and it's kind of like these fringe things. So, I mean, Ajahn Pasano was going to a bhikkhuni ordination until, I mean, he went and then was,
they got mad at him
for that. And so there are these attempts at massaging things, and we're really supported by all of our Western teachers and even our Thai teachers. They know we're intentionally not calling ourselves Ajahn Chah branch monastery, but we still talk with our teachers every month or more frequently, or they let us stay at their monastery and invite us to give talks. And it's like, unofficial, official, official, unofficial.
So a lighter question. Can you explain your robes? I mean, I know that they're a different color. I figured that much out, but obviously the structure is a little bit different, and I'm sure that there's many similarities, but we learned the symbology of our robes, some of the specific historic aspects within Tibetan Buddhism. So I was wondering if there were things you could share about your robes.
I should be very curious about the things about the Tibetan robes as well. These robes, so this is the Jiwan, which I think is the 7-panel for all of you, or the 5-panel actually. Maybe.
But you're out.
It's our outer robe. We have our lower robe.
Which is 5-panel.
5-panel, and then our Jiwan
is 7.
Okay.
And then you have another one.
Yeah, Sangati outer.
9.
Okay, good. We
that.
sometimes sew each one with different numbers of panels, but that's good to know. It goes 5, 7, 9 in Tibetan. So we have that. We call this the sabong, and the lower robe, 5 panels, and then we have our Jiwans, which are the 7-panel ones.
Chogu.
What is it called?
Chogu.
Chogu.
Yeah, your lower robe is your Shemda, then your Chogu.
Chogu. And then we have our Sangatis, which are?
Namjar.
Nandran. Okay. Yes. So that sounds like the perfect mirror, which makes complete sense. And we tend to sew our robes. There's been a recent resurgence in hand sewing. I don't quite have the patience for it, so I don't usually do it. But some really nice monks did sew this for another monk who didn't want it, so he gave it to me. So I have this, and yeah, I know that some, I've heard of some monastics taking on the practice where you will actually get a cloth from a corpse. It's quite hard to do, but it can be done in Thailand. So I've heard that like once or twice as well.
Yeah. We, at one of our monastic gatherings with people from the different traditions, we did a fashion show. Yeah, and everybody showed their robes, and it was remarkable when it came to the layout of the panels and the number of panels. Everybody had the same, but to look at them, they looked quite different.
The rice paddy.
Yeah.
Where are your tags? Your tags, right? On your own. You need these tags, and I know in certain traditions they're made into these large things. Do you have tags this?
We have little like deer's ears.
Oh, maybe we have those.
What's your tag for?
It just sort of binds it together so it doesn't fall off your arm. Basically, when I'm wearing it a different way.
Oh, we need those. Yeah, the Vietnamese and the Chinese is very nice with the clip. Yeah, because this it slides off.
The color is based on just in the Thai forest tradition. Like when you're in Thailand, it's very easy. Everybody washes their robes and dyes their robes together because we're using natural dye, and that's what makes the color. So in Thailand, in the forest, we use the heartwood of the jackfruit tree. And basically, we'll spend, the whole monastery will come together, all the monastics, and we just chop up the heartwood for 2-3 days to get several trash bins full of chips, and then just boil those down for 48 hours, and that'll create enough, boil it down with water, and that will create enough dye for maybe 3 or 4 robes. And then every week, rather than washing the robes in with like Western detergent or whatever, you're just washing your robes in a dilute solution of this jackfruit tree dye. So I did that with my robe that I sewed in Thailand, and then came to America and realized I'm not going to be able to do this whole process. So what I did, and they say, and what does happen, if you mix the jackfruit tree dye with like Tide or whatever, it kind of smells. It smells kind of gross. So you have to, so what I did is take out the Tide, like the jackfruit tree dye, but I weighed it beforehand and weighed it afterwards. And you're not just getting the color from the jackfruit tree, you're actually getting the fibers which are inside the water. So my Sangati lost 20% of its weight when I boiled out all the dye. So I basically got a light brownish white robe when it was done, but it weighed 20% less just from taking out the fibers. So I've heard that that's like how the different countries, why their robes are the colors they are. Like maybe in Tibet, it's juniper berry traditionally, or
that I don't
heard
know.
that.
I had just heard that they didn't have the color to make the regular bright color, but they had the dye, from whatever plant to make this color. Guess what? Do you know?
Why is it going to be frustration in yours and not
Well, I think they have these vests underneath. I think theirs has these vests underneath, so that can be the basis. And they have the other one just sort of as a shawl when they do the prostrations. We just have to hold the whole getup on the whole time, because underneath this, anyways, we could do it the other way, but.
Another question online. Do you happen to have advice on self-improvement without perfectionism or self-deprecation?
Venerable?
No, they're asking you.
You know, I think meditation isn't a technique, it's a an exercise in right effort, or like a whole life practice session. So all that to say that you enter practice, and inevitably, if you're coming from the conditioning prevalent in this culture of improvement, perfectionism, work, being driven by this work ethic, there will be an excess of, it will not be right effort, almost inevitably. But the real benefit of meditation practice, or a life lived with mindfulness, is the excesses of right effort are immediately visible and apparent, because you're miserable when you're sitting, or the breath becomes tight. There's no delay. And so there's a feedback loop very quickly in terms of working with that. And it does take a long time to, I mean, despite the fact that that feedback is fairly immediate, it can still take years to undo some of these more ingrained sankharas. But I think just having patience with that, like expecting that perfectionist tendency to manifest, but understanding that if you see it manifesting with your breath, you know, people get so frustrated when they see these things manifest in meditation, without realizing that whatever that pattern is likely the pattern that's dominating your entire life. Is that how you're trying to control your children, or your career, or your spouse? And it's so much safer seeing it. It's like seeing a tiger in the zoo, where you can kind of watch it rather than trying to catch it while it's out mauling children, you know? so much better to observe these things in the meditation, and just to have patience with that process, to bring a lot of loving kindness to bear. I think making changes in yourself for the sake of bodhicitta and as a gift, and remembering that you are one of those beings that you should be caring for in the process. And then understanding that, like, self-forgiveness is an understanding and a respect for our own conditionality. Like, this is where we are, and how could it be any other way? And so many of the sankharas that are especially difficult were survival mechanisms from our childhood that we would be lost without. Like, thank goodness you were a little overly extroverted, because it's what let you get the attention you needed in a family of 7. And of course you were like that. And instead of trying to push all those negative tendencies away in an aversive way, can you invite them in for a cup of cocoa, say, thank you for saving me. Thank you. I don't need you to be as active anymore, and have them take a seat. But I think you have to bring a lot of these things to bear, because at its heart, it's aversion, and that's one of our biggest defilements.
Don't have that much to say about habits, but another thing about robes. So our robes are big. I'm not sure how big yours are, but our jiwans, this Uttara Sangha, the upper robe, and the Sangati, are both about 9 feet by 6 feet. So in addition to being...
Our namjar's 9. It's big. Yeah, I don't know, 9 feet, maybe. I mean, my namjar was way, way bigger than me. Yeah, it might have been 9 feet, yeah.
That's great. I mean, so it provides a great blanket, or, I mean, when on Tudong, on this pilgrimage, Ajahn Nisabo now has a supplex Sangati, which everybody can look at. You can't even tell that it's a space-age material, but it's mostly water, at least water resistant. And so it, not just a robe, but a tent. So.
If I can go back to the perfectionism, Lama Yeshe had these very pithy phrases, and one of them was "good enough, dear." He called everybody dear, yeah, but good enough. What you're doing, what you have, who you are, is good enough. And so that became very much a mantra, in the sense that when you did something and then that perfectionist mind started churning up, well, you should have done it better, and you should have done more, and you should, then, you just heard Lami, is she good enough, dear? Good enough, dear. Yeah.
What advice would you give us, venerable children, going forward as two young, naive?
Laugh.
Got it.
I think humor is very important in our practice. To be able to make fun of ourselves, make fun of our foibles, make fun of all the stupid things we do, instead of taking ourselves so seriously, this bar up there, we've talked about it. I'm gonna get enlightened. Oh, I didn't do it. Yeah, but just to learn to laugh and relax. It takes time because we take ourselves way too seriously.
We'll call you if we start to do that.
Okay.
More than we already do. Thank you, venerable. Yeah.
And we'll have a special thing at the end of this to show you one way that we relax. They'll fall over and faint, so.
I wonder if, whether you personally believe that enlightenment is possible for every single being, in terms of if all beings can become Buddhas.
Yeah, I mean, I do believe in rebirth, and it seems like the capacity, a being's capacity to attain enlightenment in that Theravada Sutta is a really short, beautiful sutta. It is possible to abandon the unwholesome. If it wasn't possible to abandon the unwholesome, I wouldn't say abandon the unwholesome, but because it is possible, I say to do it. It is possible to cultivate the wholesome. If it wasn't possible, I wouldn't say to do it, but because it is possible, I say to do it, so you should do it. And and I really do. For me, that's like the basis of right faith, of faith. That's, I can get my mind totally around that. And reincarnation, I can get my brain around that. And I wish it was deeper, but yeah, I mean, if beings transmigrate, I mean, can a worm attain enlightenment this life? I don't think so. I don't know.
You just invited a bunch of them to the monastery.
That's right, next life. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I don't know if, I'd be curious if any other traditions say that every being in this life can attain enlightenment, but
when we say every being can attain enlightenment, it doesn't necessarily mean in this life. Yeah, but the continuum of that being.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, it is really interesting to try to encounter these two articulations of the path, and, because the implication of all beings being able to achieve awakening, I mean, what does that mean for our own duty and metta and path in terms of bodhisattva or arahant? And I don't know how this squares with everything, but, for me, we spoke with, it seems so many of the teachings reach this singularity where articulation stops seeming to do justice. And I know some of the teachings with the bodhisattva vows are given in tandem with the teachings on emptiness. And I don't know if there's a point where one realizes all beings are empty or not. But I do get the sense that some beings, even though they have cultivated the bodhisattva path, like Ajahn Chah, there comes a point where they do become awakened. And I think Ajahn Chah doing that at that moment in history released this supernova of goodness. Like, it was just such a well-timed explosion of light. And so for me, sort of, I don't exactly know where all this lands, except that day to day, I know what has called me in terms of practice. And I think good practice is good practice, and if done with loving kindness and metta and all these things. But then where that leads us in that multi-lifetime route, that I'm unsure about in terms of my own path or anyone's. But I don't know if the bifurcation is as sharp as we sometimes make it out to be. And I think sometimes when people talk about Milarepa ascending to the Dhammakaya, or Arahants in our tradition speaking about Buddhas and Arahants from the past coming to visit them after their awakening, and maybe those are just imprints of those personalities on reality after they've already achieved parinibbana, but there's something going up on those higher echelons that I have no read on. And so for me, it's sort of when Geshe-la was talking about like what's immediate truth versus this conceptual truth that's sort of out there, I feel like sometimes a lot of those more bifurcated debates get into that realm for me, and I don't really know where to go, and I don't feel the need to. So, yeah. I'm trying to feel free to correct anything there.
No, I mean, it's we're kind of taught from the beginning, at least I was, think of your future life. That's, rebirth exists. The most pressing thing you need is to prepare for future life, because it's going to take a long time to get to full awakening. If you fall to the lower realms in your next life, then you have big problems. So immediate need, create the virtue to have a good rebirth. Then after that, work on, what we call the middle scope, heading towards liberation and doing the practices that get you to liberation. And then the third scope would be the bodhisattva practice, where your mind is including all others in your aim.
Thank you, Venerable. And honestly, one of the greatest things that makes me not worry about parsing that debate out in completion in my own head, because it very much feels like it's complete in my heart. And when we come into this abbey, just feeling the resonance in the traditions and the kindness of the community, like it very much feels like, yes, one teacher, many traditions, like you said. And I saw this abbey from its earlier days, I think. Maybe the two cats and Venerable Children days, but I'm not totally sure. But it's just been such a gift to see it grow, So, yeah. And I don't know how much longer we have, but we're happy to keep talking as well.
Okay. Are there other questions or? Okay. Maybe we'll make this the last question.
Here, we often don't do strategic planning and things like that because we trust in our practice and karma and the three jewels. And I was wondering, in that spectrum from kind of corporate strategic planning to we trust karma, where you are in terms of thinking for the future and establishing Clear Mountain and getting everything running.
They had something, and this morning I
destroyed it. Not really. You helped polish it. It's been interesting. Like you control what you can from, you structure the parts that are appropriate to structure, and those have been some seemingly very small things, like the aesthetic. Gold on white has been the website. It's silly, it's just a website. But each of these little decisions seems to really affect the whole feel of things. And so in one way, it seems like we're very open. I mean, how could we not be? There's so many unknowns. But on and we've been able to plan little by little and create a structured nonprofit and such. But generally, it's been trusting the Dhamma with just faith. But doing that within, there's this story of Saint Teresa of Avila, I think, or no, it was a different saint, but in medieval Italy, she leaves her home in the middle of the night to join the Desert Fathers. And I think I mentioned this last time I was here. She had a coin and for bread, and then she heard this voice in her head that said, "Do you have faith in me or a coin?" And she said, "You, Lord," and dropped the coin. And for us, so much of it has come down to these decision points of like whether to keep holding the coin and hedging our bets or really dropping it. And it's been fascinating to see how that plays out in actual life. Like, do we rent a space or do we canvas, go speak to a bunch of churches and wait until one of them opens up their pretty imperfect but wonderful space for us. I mean, it's a gym, but it's great. The triple gym, as Arjun Kovilo calls it. So we've really been trusting that, and yet trying to be very careful with how we create the core as much as we're able to. So a mix of both, maybe.
Yeah, because I was thinking when you said you were looking for forest land in the middle of the city, and I said, yeah, you can get that for, $5 million for an acre. But also, if you're looking for land in a city, you're going to be very influenced by the neighborhood. And this kind of land you're looking for is, you mentioned yesterday, would be in a very wealthy neighborhood. Then you'll have wealthy people coming, but the poor people won't come. And, then you have to find some way to reach out to people from other socioeconomic classes, other religions, or not religions, but ethnicity and so on.
It's really relevant. Actually, that is a huge part of our vision, because the place we were looking at, it's not really in the city so much as a few minutes, maybe 20 minutes outside of the center of it, and surrounded by 3,000 acres of forest. But it's been really important to have the public transit right to there. And we definitely been contemplating, like, would we keep sort of a weekly offering in town? Because the hope is also actually, by being that close to the city, we actually might be more accessible. I mean, all the suburbs of Seattle are wealthy. I mean, you can't get away from it. But if we're close enough to be within public transport, then I think we may be more accessible to those of a lower socioeconomic. At least that's the hope. But in terms of doing outreach, I think that's absolutely right. We'll have to definitely make things accessible to them too, And there's so many different facets to think about. We've only begun to get our mind around it a little bit, So thank you, Venerable.
Okay, so has Buddha Bear and all of his relatives come?
Do they do the interview now, or do we get to interview them? No.
Yeah, so Buddha Bear, somebody gave Buddha Bear to one of our friends, and to one of our nuns, because she grew up in an orphanage and she never had a teddy bear. So Buddha Bear was very precious to her, and she went back to Germany. We're still in touch with her, and she left Buddha Bear to live here. And so Buddha Bear's been learning the Dharma. And when there's one chant in the Chinese tradition, Namo Amitofo, which you've probably heard, which is often chanted at funerals and chanted very slowly, Where's our... She just left. Where is she? Is
Should we make room for Buddha Bear? Stage, we can go sit and watch.
Oh, you're not watching.
Yeah, you get to be part of it.
Oh, good.
Yeah. See, he said, oh, good.
Should we go offline now? Huh? Should we go offline?
Yeah, you can go offline. Okay, so